Every choice has a consequence. On October 2nd, 1995, I took 23 physical steps. As I took those steps, I thought about my wife. I thought about my two children, Rob and Alex, so they were maybe this tall at the time. I thought about my career. I thought about the church where I had been music director for a number of years. I thought about everything that defined my life. I grew up in western North Carolina. In the town where I was tax partner in a firm for some years, I was Chuck Gallagher. I was a somebody. But on that day, as I took those steps, on the 24th step, I reached out my hand, pushed open the door, and stepped into federal prison. That day, I became 11-6-42-058, an inmate, what many would define as a nobody. Every choice has a consequence. Now, there is a dramatic difference between that day and today, thank goodness. And there is one thing that would make this presentation far easier. Does anybody want to guess what that might be? If I wasn't in handcuffs, that's absolutely right. Thank you, young lady, I appreciate it. And one of the things that makes this easy is if you happen to have the key. So this is the strip portion of the show, which some might, from a gratitude perspective, be wondering, I wonder what this deal's about. I have the good fortune today of being able to travel the country and talk about choices and consequences. I will say it is a little bit different when you're traveling through the airport with an orange jumpsuit and 3 sets of handcuffs. TSA tends to wonder about that. You know, you put the bag on the conveyor belt and it moves through the process. And then they see the handcuffs and they look and stop and they say, "Are you law enforcement?" And I so want to say yes, but that's impersonating an officer subject to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. And having been there once, I don't care to go back. So I look at them and I say, "No, I'm a pervert." And they look back at me and say, "Okay, that must be true." But being here today, there is a higher purpose than perhaps some of the humor that can come from Orange is the New Black. And that is, the choices we make in life have consequences. And I remember back in 1990, I was teaching a continuing professional education course to CPAs, 8 hours of tax law. I know most of you think that would be terribly boring. But on that particular day in Boise, Idaho, at the lunch break, I stepped outside and there was a pink slip on the door. And there was a note that said, "Chuck, call your office ASAP." And I did that when we stepped outside. And one of my partners said to me, he said, "Chuck," he said, "it appears that one of the clients you've invested some money for has had a sudden change and they need to liquidate that. Share with me where the file is so I can begin the process." And at that moment, I knew, and God knew the truth. And the truth was I had not invested that client's money. The truth was I had stolen it. At that moment, it was like I could see someone reaching out and taking the card in this house of cards that I had created and pulling it. And I knew that my life was getting ready to change. Now, with the short time we have, let me advance this to that evening, because that evening I recognized that everything that I had done, all that I had portrayed, the good, was getting ready to be counteracted by the poor choices that I had made. And I considered ending my life. Now, it was 1990. We didn't have Google then. We had the Yellow Pages. So I'm flipping through the Yellow Pages trying to find some help, calling psychologist, psychiatrist, someone. And I remember on the 7th call, I actually got someone on the line. And that person said to me, well, first he answers the telephone, and I say, I need to talk to somebody. And he said, I thought you were my wife. He said, had I known it was you, I wouldn't have answered the phone, but I'm running late. And I thought, well, how wonderful is that? I'm considering suicide. And he said, let's talk. I don't know if I talked to a psychiatrist, I don't know if I talked to a psychologist or the janitor, but he said something that was profound. He said, son, you've made a terrible mistake, but you are not a mistake. Son, you've made a terrible mistake, but you are not a mistake. And I realized that night that there is a vast difference between making mistakes and being a mistake, and that I was here for a purpose. Now, the choices we make in life obviously have consequences, and those consequences are unavoidable. But I will say to you that my experience in prison was the worst thing that happened and the best thing that happened. My cellmate was a young African-American fellow, about this tall, and his name was Buck. I'm Chuck, it was Buck and Chuck. I don't know if they did that for comic relief. But when I got there, Buck said to me, he said, yo, man, what you in here for? And I said, trying to muster up my best Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, I'm a thief. He says, word? I'm like, word? Yo, man, I said, word. Word. And he says, you don't understand what I'm talking about, and flies out of the cell. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not a good start. And moments later, like the Tasmanian devil, he comes flying back in and he says, yo, man, I'll make you a deal. And I'm thinking, I've been here 24 hours and a convict's wanting to make a deal with me. And then it occurred to me, I am one. And I did watch The Shawshank Redemption before going in, and it wasn't a good movie to watch before. But Buck says to me, he says, listen, man, he says, you're not going to make it in here. He says, you don't know the lingo. He says, you don't know how to act. He said, I'll make a deal with you. I'll teach you the lingo. I'll teach you what to do. I'll teach you to survive in the hood when you get out, and I'll have your back while you're in here. If you'll do one thing for me, teach me how to speak correctly so when I get out, I have a chance at getting a real job. I don't want to come back. Buck honored his portion, and when I got out, I helped him get his first job, and neither one of us are back. And I learned something profound from the experience in federal prison. You see, before I took those 23 steps, I thought I made good choices. But after I became 11-6-42-058, I found out something. Every choice has a consequence. It's a law, like gravity, and we can't avoid it. And before I took those 23 steps, I lived life as an illusion. I made plenty of good choices, but I also made choices to create an aura of what I thought I was. But after I became 11-6-42-058, I found out that all illusions go away. Go to Vegas, watch David Copperfield or Chris Angel. The shows are great. The illusions are wonderful. But when the lights go down, it was just an illusion. And before I took those 23 steps, I thought I was successful. I had the houses, the cars, the clothes, the watches, etc. But after I became 11-6-42-058, I found out success has nothing to do with that. Success has everything to do with the impact that you have on other people's lives. If I ask you, who was Miss America 2002? There's a fair chance, maybe only one or two of you in the room might know, if anyone. But if I ask you, who was the most impactful teacher in your life? Everyone's mind now is starting to think of who that person was, because we remember that, because that is success. So ladies and gentlemen, make good choices, look past the illusions, and impact people's lives. For that, I am deeply grateful from a prison experience. Every choice has a consequence. Thank you.